G'day, welcome to the Let's Thrive Show, the show where we are on a continual pursuit to be healthier, happier, and more successful. I'm your host, Ian Anderson, and in today's episode, I'm going to share a little bit about why well-being is the foundation for living a life of thriving. If you joined in for episode 1, then you're probably familiar with the concept of thriving, being that it is the continual pursuit to become healthier, happier, and more successful, or to become the best version of yourself, or self-optimization. So today I wanted to discuss a little bit about how do you go about achieving that lifestyle of thriving. And in a nutshell, the answer is well-being. But what does that mean? So well-being, similar to the term thriving, is a little bit ambiguous. It's used in a multitude of ways. It doesn't necessarily give us a clear indication of what well-being is and how do we achieve it. Many people believe well-being is about their physical health and fitness, or perhaps their mental health. And that is correct. It does include those things, but that is not all that well-being is. Our well-being is quite complex. And it's made up of multiple different dimensions or facets or pillars, if you like. And it can be quite difficult to bring all of these together in a meaningful way. And so I'm going to attempt to do that for you here today, so that hopefully you can put well-being into a meaningful context in your own life. So, as I said, well-being, an ambiguous term, and it tends to be thrown around everywhere. All of a sudden, everybody's got, or all the businesses, the big ones, have a well-being program or a wellness program, but they're all different. There's not one specific equation or guide that tells us what you must have to have a well-being program. And that's the same for us as individuals. We are all different, and therefore what well-being means to each person is going to be quite different, depending on who you are, what your circumstances are, your culture, and a few other different things. But needless to say, well-being is different for all of us. There is not necessarily, you need to be to this level of fitness to be considered well. And you need to be able to have this amount of resilience to be considered well. It's not that clear cut, and it's not that easy. Okay, so considering we are all unique, we all live in unique circumstances, then well-being and the definition that it has and the role that it has in our lives is also going to differ. To put this in a little bit of perspective, the state of well-being for an elite athlete is going to be considerably different in certain dimensions. So I talked about there being multiple dimensions, and I'll get to what those are, but certain dimensions are going to have a different state or require a different state of well-being for them to live optimally based on their context, as opposed to a parent living at home, or perhaps an executive of a multinational corporation, or somebody who is working at a coffee shop. We all have a different context for well-being, and the state in which we need to be able to live our lives optimally, given the context in which we live, is going to be different. So I'm going to go into what those different dimensions or those different pillars of well-being are. Now, before I do, well-being being an ambiguous term, there's a lot of different definitions, and there's also a lot of different models. So it's something that psychologists and scientists and biologists have all tried to explain and put in visual terms and models and things like that. I personally believe in the 8-pillar model. And the reason is, it is a model that goes across cultures. It goes across genders. It doesn't really matter who you are, where you live, or your situation, your context in life, these 8 pillars are universal. Okay, so first of all, we've got these 8 pillars being physical, emotional, social, intellectual, occupational, environmental, financial, and spiritual. Now, hopefully, as I'm saying those, you're able to, that they resonate with you, that you can see how each of those 8 different pillars plays a role in who you are. So each of those 8 different pillars of well-being have an impact on your overall well-being. They also impact each other, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but each of those 8 different pillars, they're a significant portion of your life that has the ability to impact your overall well-being, your ability to be healthy, happy, and successful. Okay, so I'm going to take you through each of the pillars one by one, but as I do, try to consider each of those pillars in terms of a portion of your life that you have a relationship with. And when I say a relationship, I mean something where you have to feed it, but then it also gives back. Okay, it's not just something that simply exists. Relationships take work, and they require you to put something good in order to get something good back. And so, very first pillar being physical well-being. Okay, think about it in terms of the relationship that you have with your physical self. So do you feed that relationship? Do you nourish the relationship that you have with your physical self? And some of the ways that you can do that are making sure that you get quality sleep, nourishing yourself with whole foods, doing regular exercise, trying to take opportunities to strengthen your immune system, and so on, making sure you get plenty of water and things like that. That's just an example of how you can move your physical well-being toward a positive state and toward your optimal. But that can also become a deficit as well. If we don't do those things, if we're not feeding that relationship, then the relationship can fall apart. And that's when that state is going to move toward that deficit. We might end up putting on excess weight. We might end up having really poor sleeping patterns that affect other parts of our life, not just our physical well-being, but our emotional well-being, our social well-being, intellectual well-being. Okay, so you can see how they start to impact each other. Same thing for hydration. Nourishing yourself with whole foods can affect your immunity. All of those things. So if we're not feeding that relationship, if we're not intentionally trying to improve it, then we can see that pillar move toward a deficit state, and therefore pulling down our well-being as well. Now, the same is true for all of the other pillars. So emotional well-being. Now, our emotional well-being is really about how is our relationship with our thoughts and feelings, and do we acknowledge how we feel? Do we understand that how we feel is actually important? Do we take opportunities to grow and build resilience through those feelings that we have and the experiences that we go through? Or do we suppress and try to shy away from dealing with some of those challenges that we have? Because that can be the difference between moving your emotional well-being to a positive state or it turning into a deficit. Social well-being. Do you take opportunities to become or to strengthen the relationships around you? So do you feed into relationship with your family members, with your friends, or do you expect them just to happen? What can happen if we become complacent and just expect things to happen is those relationships can deteriorate over time. Okay, they're not being strengthened, they're not being fed, and so therefore, again, can turn into a deficit. Now, the importance of social well-being is having a sense of community and support, safety in numbers, all those sorts of things. And so when we don't have a positive state of social well-being, when we go through challenging times and we don't have that support network or structure, then that can really make it challenging exponentially challenging to deal with the problems that we're facing. Your intellectual well-being is the next one. So how do you feed or nourish your intellectual self? So a way to elevate the state of your intellectual well-being is to be curious, to try and learn new things or new skills, trying to practice problem solving. So we can often find other people to help fix our problems, but that's not necessarily helping our intellectual well-being in terms of going through critical thinking, solving the problems for ourselves, or trying to find the answers for ourselves. So even using obviously search engines or books, or taking time just to read a simple novel, to be curious, that can feed your intellectual well-being. And then the opposite is, again, if you do nothing, or if you see that as being too much of a challenge, too hard, then your intellectual well-being might actually move toward the deficit, which is a shame, because within us we all have a natural kind of curiosity, but oftentimes if we're potentially struggling in some of our other pillars, so we might be low in energy, or perhaps we're going through some emotional problems, then dealing with problem solving and critical thinking and being curious about the world around us can often seem like too much of a task. And so again, you can see how some of those other pillars are going to have an impact elsewhere, holding down or stunting the growth of our well-being. Your occupational well-being is the next one. And that's really about the relationship that you have with either work, if you're working, or study or school, depending on what age or stage of life you're at. And so what relationship do you have with work? Is it something that is taking control of your life? Do you have a give and take relationship? So are you doing work that also allows you to do other things that are important to you, to feed the other purposes that you have in life, that allow you to take part in your hobbies and leisure activities? Or is it kind of sucking all of your life into one thing, which so often is the case these days, where people are experiencing burnout because they don't have that balance? The other part of that is, does it fulfill your purpose? Do you feel like you have a sense of purpose in what you do? Does it provide some sort of meaning in the work that you are doing? Or if you're studying, do you see the purpose in that studying is going to get you somewhere that is going to have a meaningful impact in your life or in the lives of those around you? The next one is environmental well-being. Again, think about it in terms of that relationship. How is your relationship with your environment? Now, that can be your natural environment, or it could be just the environment in which you live. So do you feel safe and secure within your community, within your house? And then also with your natural environment, do we, I guess, respect and nurture the natural environment so that it can actually help to nourish us? So an example of the natural environment situation is pollution and litter actually damages the natural environment around us, which we rely on to feed us, to provide us with oxygen, minerals, nutrients. All these sorts of things come from the natural environment. So if we're damaging that, then obviously that's going to hurt us in the long run. Same thing about your other environments in which you live. If you put out, I guess, negativity, then you're more likely to have negativity come back at you. If you're feeding positivity into your environment, if you're using all sorts of different methods. You can paint walls different colors, you can add plants to your house, you can have little quotes on the wall in the form of artwork that feed positivity into your life. And so that's about that relationship that you have with the environment around you. The next one is your financial well-being. What's the relationship that you have with your finances? Do you live just to get your paycheck so that you can go and spend it on things? Do you impulsively buy things? Or do you have a relationship with your finances where you understand that it needs to fulfill certain duties, but you're not a slave to it? Do you take opportunities to invest, donate, save? Do you pay your bills on time? All those sorts of things can impact the state of your financial well-being, and in turn impact the state of all of the other pillars as well. And then finally we get to our spiritual well-being. And this is one that a lot of people get hung up on because they think, well, I'm not necessarily religious, so this one doesn't apply to me. And religion is just one way that people find spiritual or fulfill spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being really refers to having a sense of meaning and purpose and being connected to something bigger than yourself. So for some people, yes, that's religion, and it allows them to be part of a community that has similar values, beliefs. It gives them a purpose that they are going to live a particular way to try and fulfill that purpose. But other people will find their sense of meaning and purpose within their family unit or within the job that they do. So it's really just about how do you connect your spiritual well-being, so your meaning and purpose, to part of your life. And it's not uncommon for people to have a strong sense of meaning and purpose in multiple areas of their life. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. I know many people that feel a strong sense of connection to religion, work, and their family unit, and they draw a sense of purpose from all of those. So those are the 8 different pillars that, in my opinion, tend to give the best representation of well-being, in that all of these 8 are a significant portion of our lives, and they all have the ability to impact each other. So just to elaborate on the impact that they can have on each other, if you imagine that there's a scale, and down one end we have -5, in the middle we have 0, and at the other end you've got +5. Okay, so we've got this scale. Now, the majority of us, our state of well-being would be floating around 0, in this neutral area. We might have some pillars that are -1 or 2, might have some that are +1 or 2, but really we're not thriving with all pillars up towards the +5, and we don't really have everything in a deficit down to the -5. We're somewhere in the middle. So to have an understanding of how these pillars impact each other is, as we start to try and feed and nourish each of these pillars in a positive way, then we can begin to move the score or the state further towards that +5 number for that particular pillar, which tends to have a positive impact on the other pillars. So by improving one, we can unintentionally have a positive impact on the others as well. But the challenge is we often don't pay attention to all 8 pillars. Okay, it's quite a lot to take in. It's quite a lot to focus on, particularly if we're not really sure how they really have an impact in our life. And so what we do is we neglect a couple of them. So we might focus on our physical well-being, we might focus on our emotional well-being, but the others, well, I'm going to push them to the side for the moment, and I'll get to them once I get these 2 that I'm focusing on up toward the +5. But as we neglect others, what that does is it, unintentionally causes a deficit within those pillars. And that deficit, because we're neglecting them, tends to stunt the growth or hold back the growth in the pillars that we're paying attention to. Okay, so we might not be able to get the improvements that we want to see, even though we're feeding it and we're nourishing it in our physical well-being, in our emotional well-being, even though we're doing the things that we think we should. If we haven't paid attention to the other pillars, then we're only going to see so much progress. our progress is going to be stunted if we don't try to acknowledge all 8 of the pillars. To really find out the true areas or the obstacles in our life that we could improve upon. So that's a little bit of an idea of how they can have a positive influence on each other, but also understanding that as some of those pillars fall into a deficit, it can drag down other pillars or stunt the growth. I know that's been a lot to take in. Hopefully that makes sense. So just to recap, in order to pursue a life of thriving, the foundation is well-being. And what I mean by that is, in order to realize your true potential, in order to perform at your best, in order to be your healthiest, happiest, and most successful version of yourself, then you must start by analyzing each of the 8 pillars of well-being within your life and the relationship that you have with your physical, emotional, social, intellectual, occupational, environmental, financial, and spiritual selves. And really try to understand, how do you feed those? How could you feed them more? What could you do to move each of those pillars further in the positive direction, therefore allowing you to live with greater potential, or more of your existing potential, but just unlocked, so that you can then experience all that life has and live a life of thriving. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that it resonated with you in a meaningful way. Hopefully it raised your awareness to potential parts of your life where you've been turning a blind eye or potentially neglecting, that might have been impacting your ability to overcome some of those obstacles, that it might have been holding you back from living that life of thriving and becoming your best self. As always, please feel free to email me directly on the email below with feedback or topic suggestions for future episodes. Otherwise, I hope you stay happy and healthy, and I will join you with another episode here shortly. Take care.